I think D&D's chromatic dragons are too similar to each other in combat. So in this video, I'm going to lay out a series of mechanical changes that you can apply to make each of D&D's evil dragons a little more distinct from each other and a little more dangerous. By the way, this is my Dragon Week video, so thank you to Ginny D and Pointy Hat for making this community event happen. Now let's establish a few ground rules. I'm not going to add anything to the lore of these dragons. I think the lore of D&D dragons is pretty cool as is, and I've gone over all the chromatic dragon lore in a separate video, so if you want to know about the habits and backgrounds to these various evil dragons, you can check that out there. The changes that I'm going to suggest are all pretty simple and will just affect combat for these dragons, and in all cases they are going to make the dragons a little bit more challenging for the players. Personally, I like my dragon bosses to be pretty tough. I want them to be a little bit nastier, but at the end of this video, I'm going to suggest an optional rule that will be applied across all of these dragons and can make them all just a little bit more vulnerable, hopefully redressing any imbalance caused by my new abilities and rules. I'm also not going to suggest anything to radically alter the power ranking of the chromatic dragons. By the end of this video, a white dragon should still be weaker than a red dragon, and I mentioned those two because that's the order we're going to go in, from the humble white dragon to the mighty red. Let's begin. White dragons live in icy tundras and snow-clad mountains, and their whole theme is based around the cold. Their breath weapon deals cold damage, so that's where we'll start. A dragon's breath weapon is a cone of cold air. It hits the players. If they succeed a dex save, they're able to extricate themselves slightly and they take only half damage. If they're caught in the center of it and they fail on their dex save, they take their full damage. So far so good, but we're going to make it a little bit more interesting, and we're going to apply a speed penalty. As that icy air flows over them, their bodies are covered in a thick layer of ice and frost. Those who succeed on their checks have their speed halved until the start of the dragon's next turn. Those who fail on their dex save are rooted to the spot and weighed down by the ice. They are restrained until the start of the dragon's next turn. Even while restrained, a player can still attack, cast spells. They're just rooted to the spot by the ice, but they're not entirely out of the game, so it's not too punitive, and those who have succeeded are only slowed down and can still act otherwise as normal. So it shouldn't take anyone out of the game, but it does mean that even if you are loaded up with healing spells and healing potions, taking that damage isn't the only thing you're going to have to worry about. You can't just cancel that up by healing up, because now you're slowing down, and now you're going to have to deal with the fact that the whole party is operating a lot less efficiently than they were before. None of the other dragons on this list will have abilities to slow players down in this way, so it's a unique thing for the white dragon. It's something that is tied to the white dragon's theme of cold and ice, and it's also a problem that the players will only have to think about when engaging with this particular kind of dragon. Black dragons are reclusive history buffs who tend to make their lairs in the ruined cities of lost civilizations. They're also full of acid. A black dragon's breath weapon is, of course, acid. It's a line 60 foot long and 5 feet wide of acid that sprays out of their mouths, hits everything in that direction, and forces players to take a dex save to try and get out of the way. Our new black dragon still has that acidic breath weapon, but it's going to corrode through armor as well as dealing damage. So when a player gets hit by that acid, if they fail their dex save and get fully covered in it, any armor they're wearing takes damage. Every time that happens to a player, every time they're targeted by the breath weapon and fail their dex save, they're going to have a reduction of -1 to any armor pieces they're wearing. So for example, if they've got a chain shirt on with an AC of 13, that comes down to an AC of 12. If they're holding a shield equipped on their arm with an AC of 2, that comes down to an AC of 1. Now, getting hit with that acid isn't just a problem for your HP on one turn, it's lowering your overall AC during the combat and making you more vulnerable to tail attacks, bite and claws from the black dragon, and also to any attacks by the black dragon's minions. Afterwards, a player with smithing tools can restore their armor to its former glory. One long rest with their smith tools adds +1 to their armor's AC, back up to the original AC. They can't exceed that obviously during the repair process. So if your shield got messed up and went down to 0 essentially, then after 2 long rests you can get that back up to its former glory at its full +2 to your AC. AC. Alternatively, you can just drop your armor or items off at the blacksmith and pay them, and you'll get it back later that day, fully restored. Once again, this is the only draconic feature on this list that's going to impact AC and armor, so the players will have this memorable impression that when they fought the Black Dragon, they had an experience with it that they wouldn't have anywhere else. We were trying to get away from that sense that dragons are just the same monster with slightly different colors and slightly different names for the kind of damage they do. Green dragons are classic European fantasy dragons. They often live in forests or wooded wetlands, and they're very associated with poison. Their breath weapon is a plume of poison gas. Now, instead of doing anything to the dragon's breath weapon, we're going to make two slightly smaller changes in the dragon's favour. Change number one is going to be based on colour and overall intelligence of this creature. It's cunning, stealthy, and it's green. So in a forest, it can blend in really well. It has advantage when in forested terrain on all stealth checks. That's going to give it a much higher chance of launching a successful ambush and getting the players under the surprise condition at the start of combat. Now, you could argue that for white dragons they should have the same ability, because when they're in snowy tundra and icy environments, their white scales blend into the background. But this advantage for the green dragon isn't just based on colour and environment. It's also based on the dragon's intelligence. It's considerably smarter than the white dragon, which actually has a -1 for intelligence. So our green dragon is cunning and subtle enough to use the environment as a way to gain advantage and know that it's blending in and make the most of that. And at the same time, if you dig into the lore a bit, there's references to green dragons having softer scales, allowing them to move in more subtle and stealthy ways. The second change that we're going to make for the green dragon relates to poison. Obviously, it's themed around poison, its breath weapon, it's poisonous, it's often found in swamps that might have poison gas, and in this case, we're going to say that a cloud of poison gas kind of clings around the dragon wherever it goes, oozing out through the scales. And if a creature ends its turn within 5 feet of the dragon, within melee range, essentially, it's going to take 2d8 poison damage. Now, that isn't a huge amount of damage, but it will start to add up over time, and players are going to be taking that damage any time they end their turn up close fighting with a dragon. That's going to really impact things like monks, fighters, and of course barbarians. And the cool thing here as well, barbarians, even when raging, are still going to take that poison damage just as normal, because the rage doesn't negate poison damage. One thing I particularly like about effects that impact players who are too close to a monster is it actually encourages players to think ahead and bring equipment that will help them. For example, any player who brought a lance or a glaive, anything with the reach ability, to the combat is now going to be able to deal that damage, that melee damage, without getting into the 5 feet area around the dragon where they take the poison damage. So if they've maybe encountered a green dragon before, they'll come back for their next green dragon encounter with a clearer sense of what to do to get around those issues. A little bit of problem solving is never a bad thing in combat. So now we have a green dragon which is much more likely to ambush the players and get a stealthy early advantage against them. And we've got a dragon whose very presence is poisonous, especially if you get too close to it and want to land some hits. Blue dragons are my favourite chromatic dragons, aesthetically and from a story perspective. They're arrogant, manipulative puppet masters, and they breathe lightning. Once again, we're going to make two changes. Now, with the white and black dragons, we added additional functions to the breath weapon. With the blue dragon, we're just going to change the way the breath weapon is deployed. Rules as written, an adult blue dragon's breath weapon is just a line of lightning, 90 feet long and 5 feet wide. It operates essentially exactly the same as the black dragon's line of poison. It's just a different kind of damage and a little bit longer in the case of the blue dragon. That's why we're going to get rid of this line format and instead use a chain lightning variant. Now the dragon, when it wants to use its breath weapon, picks a target within 90 feet and fires its lightning at that target. Then any creature within 10 feet of that original target is also going to get forked by the lightning lancing out from that first target. Any creature within 10 feet of these secondary targets also suffers lightning damage as it lances out again. This continues until it hits a creature or creatures that don't have any other creatures within 10 feet of them. Once that chain lightning has rippled out through all of these different people, 10 feet apart, all the affected creatures roll their dex saves as normal, taking full damage on a failure and half damage on a success. Ultimately, it's roughly the same outcome, but it feels and aesthetically looks a lot more interesting than just another straight line of damage. Does it make sense that with your decks you can mitigate the effects of lightning by just kind of moving quickly out of the way, getting slightly struck by lightning, but not fully struck by lightning? No, but that is how it seems to work with vanilla blue dragons and with the chain lightning spell, so that's what we'll go with. The second change we'll make is again another nasty one for melee fighters. The whole dragon's body, I think, is probably charged with electricity. So if you have a metal weapon and you deal slashing or piercing damage, cutting in and under the scales into that crackling interior of the body, electricity is going to flow along the metal and into you, and you'll take 1d8 lightning damage. Again, not a huge amount, but for that melee fighter who might be landing 2 or even 3 attacks on a turn, that's a lot of lightning damage across the course of the fight. Now, when the players encounter a blue dragon on a sunwashed pirate island or a distant desert, they're going to have a much more memorable experience fighting a dragon with a unique breath weapon and unique anatomical threats that they're going to learn about as they fight the monster. Finally, we have the red dragon, the biggest, baddest boy in the bunch, potentially the most iconic monster in D&D, except for the half dragon. He's pretty cool. A pretty cool guy. Red dragons breathe fire, hoard gold, and just fulfill every draconic stereotype you can think of. Now we're going to keep the core of the classic fire breath as normal, but we'll add a little bit on top of it. Now if you fail your dex save and your body is covered in that intensely hot draconic fire, any armor you're wearing that is made of metal will start to heat up, and even after the flames have subsided around you, that metal will retain its heat for a little bit longer. You take that initial damage, and then at the start of your next turn, you take a further 2d8 damage because of the hot metal that is still strapped around your body. If you're wearing a helmet, then you also take an extra d8, making it 3d8 total. The thing I like about this is that the players will experience the breath weapon for the first time and think they're just going to take fire damage. And that happens, and then you as DM describe how their armor is glowing and almost bubbling around them, and they think, I assume the DM's just mentioning that for flavor, that's not going to come back and bite me. And then at the start of their next turn, they take that damage because the armor is still on them, still burning them. We're also going to give the red dragon a second breath weapon, but this one doesn't work on a recharge function. They just get 2 uses of it per long rest, which they can use back to back or spaced out, however they want to deploy them. Now this is a sulphurous black smoke that comes out of the dragon's fiery belly and flows out in a 60-foot cone. Any creature caught in that cone has to succeed on a dex save. On a success, they just jump out and they get clear. On a failure, they're stuck in the black cone of smoke for a moment and it fills their eyes, blinding them. Even if they stagger free, their eyes are running and stinging and they're going to be blinded until the end of their next turn. For that dex save, I would just keep things simple and use the same DC as the main breath weapon. And when you think about it, 2d8 to 3d8 fire damage isn't too much on top of the breath weapon. Being briefly blinded isn't too bad, you can still move around and attempt to fight at disadvantage, but the point is we're just adding a little bit more into the mix, where players will have an experience with this red dragon they simply couldn't have with another one. I said at the start of this video that I was also going to give you an optional rule that you could apply to all of these dragons to make them a little bit more vulnerable, and in doing so address any potential balancing issues caused by the rules we've implemented from earlier in this video. This is an optional homebrew rule, but it's one I've used myself and it works pretty well. What makes dragons so difficult in combat for players is the fact they can fly and attack from range. Well, what if there's a way to change that? In D&D, you're really not meant to be able to target a specific body part on a monster for obvious reasons. However, when it comes to dragons and their wings, I would make an exception. So this is simply a rule to damage the wings. When a player is attacking a dragon, either with a melee or a ranged attack, they can choose to take a -10 penalty to their attack and officially call it that they are going to target the wing. With that -10 penalty, if they can still hit the dragon's AC, then they do damage to the wing. The dragon only takes half damage from this attack, but the wing takes 1 injury. Once a wing has taken 3 injuries, the dragon can no longer fly. This creates a fun asymmetry where at the start of the battle it's really important for ranged attackers and spellcasters to step up and do what they can to damage the dragon's wings, and then later in the battle as they bring it down to the ground and take away its flying capacity, the fighters and the barbarians and the monks can rush in and finish the job. It also serves to speed combat up a little bit, because oftentimes towards the latter portion of a dragon fight, with its wings in play, the dragon can stretch things out for ages by just keeping out of the player's range, and potentially just flying away if things get dangerous for it. But this way there's a way for players to escalate the situation and kind of snowball towards an epic conclusion, where they get the monster onto the ground and then dogpile it. And with that, we're out. I hope this video helped you in some way. I hope that some of the ideas have sparked inspiration for you to make your dragons more unique from each other, more flavorful and dangerous. And perhaps you think that some of these effects are a little bit overpowered or underpowered, and maybe you can go away and develop your own ideas in response to that. That's pretty cool too. I would love to hear about them. My goal here is just to suggest ways in which you can take these iconic monsters and make them a little bit more iconic. Again, thank you to Ginny D and Pointy Hat for making this community event happen. It was fun to be a part of it. I totally missed Kraken Week last year, so I'm happy I got on this this time round. Thank you to the people in my Discord who told me about it, because I had totally missed it. And a big thank you to everyone who watched. Please like, subscribe, comment if you can. It really helps the channel. If you want to support what I do here, there's a link to my Patreon down below where you can get access to more than 1,500 pages of my original D&D homebrew content. But that's me for now. I'll see you next time.